We're going to be starting in Revelation chapter 17 tonight. I got a lot of drainage, so excuse me. I'm going to read chapter 17. I really didn't want to read everything, but this is going to be a difficult chapter. It says, Revelation 17, verse 1 says, And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto you the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, and hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of the life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I thank you for this evening, and I thank you for your word. I pray, Lord, that you would bless our study. I pray that, Lord, you would guide us, that you would give us some understanding, that, Lord, we would draw closer to you. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, amen. I'm glad you're here. I won't say I've been worried about this study, but I've been concerned about getting ready for it. To me, it's a very difficult subject. I don't think there's certain things about it that I understand, I think, fairly clearly, that I think I have a fairly good concept on, and there's other parts about it that I have a hard time with. And the things that I think are fairly clear are difficult because they're not pleasant, and so it's just a difficult passage to go through. I got a question for you. Do you have a King James?
Yes.
Do you have all of that in verse, the name in verse 5, all in capitals?
Yes. Except for the first line.
Yeah, the first line. I've wondered, I didn't look up, I was going to look up in other versions, see if they all put it in capitals too.
We have the other 3 versions.
Okay, you got all 4? I've got 4 different 4?
Only American Standard and New International is, the Amplified is not.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right about the Amplified. Okay. At any rate, I was just curious because different people do things differently, and I wasn't sure if they were using this as a proper name, but they're emphasizing the name, that this is a name as much as an identifier as anything else. I'm going to start out with timing.
If it makes any difference, they're all the same exact wording too.
Okay. I just now noticed this on my outline, I have a double A, so but I did want to mention the timing that we've got coming up here. I think this timing is after or right at the last of the 7th vial, the one we just finished going through. I think it's at the very end. I think it's right at the last, just before Jesus Christ comes back. I think it's during that time of the seventh vial when all those things come down, all the last of the judgments come down, the city is divided into three parts, the great earthquake, all of this. I think this is the time frame for this occurrence. If you'll remember, when we were looking at the other ones, we had a couple other places where, and I thought I wrote them down, but I don't see them here, where Babylon is mentioned as the great Babylon is fallen. Babylon is fallen. It talks about that the judgment is coming for the great whore, and I'd have to look them up right now, and I thought I wrote them down, but apparently I didn't. At any rate, I'm sorry about that. I should have. I thought I did. At any rate, so one of the seven angels who had the seven vials, so this is after the seven vials, or right, like I said, at the last of the seventh vial, one of the angels came to him and said, look, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great whore. That obviously nobody thinks of going to church and studying about a whore. So that there's a jolt, if you will, a shock, if you will, on doing this. We need to remember God does not pull punches. God says things the way they are. He's not trying to be gross, but he's going to be very forward and so you can understand it. Some things he says in a gross manner just so you'll pay attention and listen to him, I think. And he's going to show he's going to show John the judgment of the great whore. Now the whole of chapter 17 is only, I won't say, it's not prefatory, it is not a preface, but it is an introduction, it is an explanation of things that we're going to look at and why the whore is being judged. Who is the whore? Where is she at? Where is she located? How can we locate the whore? What are we doing here? And so that's what we're going to look at. And the first one, I took this in my outline, and I took pieces from different parts of the chapter. Your wife's here, Brian, David. So I took different parts of this and put them together on the whore and the scarlet-colored beast, because those are the two things, the two main personages, or the two main items of interest in this chapter as far as identifying what's going on. It says that she sits on many waters, and you see verse 15. Says unto me in verse 15, he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So she's sitting, these waters that we're talking about. I think we discussed this earlier in another study, where waters, the waters that came out of the mouth of the dragon after the woman, were peoples, or could possibly be peoples, because sometimes the waters refer to peoples, to multitudes and to peoples. So when he's saying that he's talking about her, she sits upon many waters. She's on top of, over, controlling, or whatever. She's on top of many nations and tongues and peoples. So there is a great control. There is a great leadership here, and so that's what we're dealing with. And so that's who she is. That's a little bit of an identification. It also says in verse 2 that the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So, as a whore, she's associated with fornication. God has a thing against whoredom. God has a thing against fornication. God has a thing against any type of sexual sin. He looks like, in my understanding of the Bible, I think it's very clear, the only sex that God allows is between a man and his wife, and a husband and wife, man and a woman, in the marriage relationship, and no other. So that is the way God looks at it. And also, if you look in number 2 point that I gave you, I've got a lot of different verses. And I wanted to make one specific point here, very carefully, that I think they're talking about spiritual, going after other gods, going after other religions, going after other types of worship, going after other worship that they prefer rather than the worship of God. It's spiritual adultery, it's spiritual fornication, it's idolatry, and I've given you a bunch of verses. I'm going to go to one real quick in James, just a couple of books back, probably about 15 pages. James chapter 4 and verse 4 says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses," and James is talking to Christians, he's talking to brethren. He says, "Ye adulterers and adulteresses," and he's calling them adulterers and adulteresses. "Know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God." So he's making a point here that God looks at this when you're going after other things other than God, and you put other things in your life before God. That's idolatry, but it's also fornication, it's adultery, and God doesn't like it. God is against it. In fact, in the Old Testament, you'll find, if you read it and go through it and take a look at it and understand, he says that he actually gave a writing of divorcement to the people of Israel as his wife because of their fornications and their whoredoms, because they were chasing after other gods. And he tells it, he's very clear. So I gave you a bunch of verses to make this point very clear. This is not a weird idea. This is not something new. One back. So I think what he's talking about, when we're talking about the whore, we're talking about the religion, we're talking about putting God first, we're talking about some sort of spiritual relationship, we're talking about something that affects the relationship of us to God. And when he's talking about this whore, she's the one who has sold herself to go her own way and rejected the God that she should be serving. So when we're talking about this whore, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about religion. We're talking about a religious practice. We're talking about a religion. We're talking about maybe many religions, because it calls her the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. We're talking about a woman who has, a spiritual woman, if you will, who has sold herself for her own pleasures, for her own gain, for her own profit, for whatever desires that she wanted, whatever gain she could get, whatever advantage she could get. That's what a whore does. And this is a religion. It is something that's come up, and it's practiced, and it's something that God is going to judge, and we're going to look at some things it says about it that make it very bad. She had been fornicating, or the kings of the earth had been with her consorts. I don't want to keep saying the word fornication because it comes out wrong. But the fact of the matter is, her consorts were the kings of the earth. The powerful people of the earth, the ones who had control, the ones who ruled the earth, the great people of the earth, they were the ones who were consorts and her fellow players, and they committed fornication with her, and they've been made, the people of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her acts. So they've gone crazy, they've gone after it, they've followed it with a passion. They have enjoyed it, they have gone through it. And he said he carried him away in the wilderness, and I saw a woman, so that's the whore, set upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Did we ever see this before? Remember the great red dragon? That's a red dragon. It was a red beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. So here we have associated with the devil. We know that the dragon was the devil. It specifically identified him as the devil. It tells us who this is. So it says that she's sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast who is over the people, and he's got a head full of names of blasphemy. He's got 7 heads and 10 horns. So we know what the association is here. We've got the woman, which is spiritual adultery, fornication against God. We've got the one that she's with, the one she's resting on, and that's the devil, the great red dragon, the great red beast, the scarlet-colored beast. And it says that she was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. Anybody think about who wears scarlet and purple? Purple and scarlet? Kings, queens, royalty. Okay, they're the way up there. And I think this comes not so much because it's the better looking colors. I think it was the most expensive colors that they could get. So that's where it started with. But she's decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So this woman is royally decked out, extremely rich, extremely wealthy, sitting on top of the world. I mean, she's drinking out of a golden cup, and she's doing whatever she wants to do. Set up on her forehead was a name written. Now you notice the commas in this, okay? Mystery. And it's Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. First of all, I'm going to take mystery. It's not exactly made all that clear specifically who it is. We're going to have to look at what it says in the other parts of the passage, other parts of the Bible possibly, to find out who we're talking about. This is a mystery. It's not just, okay, blatantly out there. We're going to have to look at it. We're going to have to see it. So it's going to have to be revealed to us. Babylon the Great. Where is Babylon? You've been to Babylon, haven't you? Sorry? Yeah. But it's a ruin. I don't know how much is there.
Especially
And-
after ISIS.
Sorry?
Especially after ISIS.
Yeah, well,
Anything preserved, they got rid of.
but even so, if you, and I wrote down here a couple of references. I think I put them here. I did somewhere. Man, I had them already. If you look at Isaiah chapters 13 and 14, and I'm not going to turn there right now, but if I didn't write them down, you can look at them later. Isaiah chapters 13 and 14, and I think it's Jeremiah chapters 50 and 51. Oh, man. Those are prophecies concerning Babylon before Babylon conquered Israel. Babylon was an up-and-coming city. It was always a large and a strong, powerful city before Nebuchadnezzar came to power. And it was predicted that Babylon was going to come and destroy Israel, going to come and conquer Israel. And then because of their actions against the people of Israel, God was going to destroy them. So here we have those prophecies, and you can look at it. And going through the commentaries and trying to figure out some of these things and the different prophecies and all the different details of the prophecies can rattle your brain, actually, if you try to go through it and put it all together. But some commentaries, they pointed out, because it talks about that there can be no stone left on another. They're not even going to take the stones away to build other buildings. It's going to destroy all of Babylon. It's going to be gone. And so he was thinking that Babylon out there in the Middle East is going to be rebuilt. I don't know that that's true. I don't see that in the cards. Maybe so. Others say, that's not it. It's another one. I don't think it's that physical Babylon. I think it's very clear who we're talking about here, and we're going to see that in a minute. It's a mystery, but it's also mystery of Babylon. What is the mystery of Babylon? Well, if you go back in history and you start looking at it, and I've got several books on it, I've read several books. I've got one book, I think, left, but I've read other books on it. If you look at the mystery of Babylon, the religion of Babylon has carried through to this day. You can still find it. It's still around. And we'll look at that a little bit here. I didn't come to badmouth it, but we will look at it here in a minute. And with some other things that go with it. So it's a carryover of the spiritual Babylon, what I was talking about, the religious adultery, the religious immorality, carried over from the first Babylon. Do you remember the story of Babel in chapter 11 of Genesis, where they were going to build a tower up unto God, and God said there's nothing going to be stopped from these people, and he confounded the languages, and that's what we come where we get the term Babel. People Babel comes from the city of Babel, which was built by Nimrod, which I think was a grandson or a great-grandson of Noah. So it's that old. It goes all the way back to right after the flood. 100 years or so after the flood, you've got Nimrod building Babel, and he builds some other ones. He built Nineveh even. So those cities that we've heard about and gone through have come through all the way through history. They've been there, and they're that old. So Babel was known as the place where certain religions were started, and we're going to look at that just very briefly. And that's what I think it's talking about. Was talking about mystery, Babylon the Great. Not the old Babylon, but I think the Babylon that carried over, the Babylon that was carried through with different religious rites and whatever. That's the best take I can give you on it. But it said also in verse 6 that the woman was drunken with the blood of the saints, with the bloods of the martyrs of Jesus. That should give us another clue as to who this is. Okay, who's been killing the martyrs of Jesus? Where did they go through? Where did all go through this? And we'll look at that. The blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And it says, and this is a curious thing, John says, and when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. He wondered with great admiration. I think it surprised him. He was surprised at what he saw and what he found there. And even the angel said, wherefore didst thou marvel? What's so interesting? What is it? And I think he looked at it and realized that this is a spiritual incarnation of religion, and it surprised him. But that's what he's talking about, the great whore here. So that's my opinion. That's what I think.
Now see, couldn't these be two different women?
Why would you think it's two different women?
Because you're seeing the first woman in 17, then 3, he says he carried him away into the wilderness, and he saw a woman there. So.
Okay, in chapter 1, in 17:1.
Yeah, 17:1.
Okay, 17:1. He says,
one
I'm going to
woman.
show you the judgment of the great whore.
Right.
So he takes him and shows him the judgment. He shows him the whore first.
Okay, yeah.
Okay? So now I think it's very clear that this is one woman,
One woman.
one
Same
whore,
woman.
and so there it is. Because it talks about that he shows her and he carries me away and he'll see her and she's arrayed in purple. He keeps talking about her and she's drunken. And I'll tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns.
Okay.
And I think it's interesting when he comes here and says, I'm going to explain this to you. And he starts with the beast first and not the woman. So it's interesting. But it says, the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. I think we saw this earlier in one of the chapters, one of the studies we went through. Remember an angel coming out of the bottomless pit? A king coming out of the bottomless pit, the king over the locust came out of the bottomless pit. At any rate. And he's going to go into perdition. I think if we remember, we looked at Apollyon and Abaddon, and those names were perdition. And we talked about Judas Iscariot being the son of perdition. We looked at that a little bit. He's going to go into perdition, so that this beast that thou sawest has been out there, and he is not, and he's going to come out of the bottomless pit. He's going to come up, and I don't know that it's actually the angel that came out of the bottomless pit with all the locusts, but he comes out of the bottomless pit, and he's going to go into, and he's going to take over, and he's going to rule and carry the woman, carry the whore. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written into the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not, and yet is. This is a mystery to me. You can get all sorts of explanations on it, what they're talking about, who it was that was and is not and yet is. And we can sort of say that about Jesus Christ, that he was on the earth, he died, he was not, and now he is. So I don't know if it's the same beast that got the head wound and is going to be resurrected and all the world marvels. There's some things about this that are a little bit, you're going to have to take it, understand it, and let God show you what it is. But it's not exactly pinpointed that this is exactly what it says. Even when you get back into Daniel, and we're going to look at Daniel a little bit here in the mind. But it says, here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads of the beast are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Anybody know a city that sits on 7 hills? Rome. It has been known historically from, I think, before Jesus Christ as the city on 7 hills. There are other cities that I've heard people try and use to say this is what it is, but no other city is as well known for sitting on 7 hills as the city of Rome. And that becomes important when we come back, and we're going to look at some other things in a little bit on how we're identifying what we're going to identify and what we're going to say here. So we're talking about a city on 7 hills. We're talking about a religious, spiritual abomination and filthiness connected with that city and with that whore. And then it says, and there are 7 kings, talking about these 7 heads, 10 horns. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So we're talking about a future king that's going to come into play. We've looked at several different ones where the beast comes up, different ones come up and take control, and they go through it. If you go back to Daniel, and I'll give you some references which I had given you before, and I can write them down, I didn't put them on this thing. We'll go back and look at some things about this, and of course I can't explain it all. It talks about one that's going to come up, he's the 8th, and is of the 7, and he goeth into perdition. Here he is again, going into perdition. And I keep bringing that up because when we looked at it earlier, and we're talking about the one that was called the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name was Apollyon and Abaddon, and his name is perdition. He's going into perdition. We're talking, I think, here about the same person. So that's what it looks like to me. And it says, on the 10 horns on the beast, which thou sawest are 10 kings. This is a different set of kings. If you take a look at it, we've got 7 kings. Now we've got 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but will receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So it's a very short time frame when they're going to have their power. They're going to have their rule and their reign and their heyday, if you will. I don't know. I think what this basically means is that, well, they're obviously means they're not in power yet. I don't think they are traditional kingdoms, if you will. They may be upstarts. They may be rebels. They may get their chance for power when the Antichrist shows up. They may get their chance for power to go along and play with him, and because they're his lieutenants or because they were working with him. But at any rate, they have a short kingdom, but they will receive power with kings 1 hour with the beast that was the Antichrist. But it says in verse 13 something curious to me. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. And then it's going to make war with the Lamb. And I think there's another place, and I don't see it right now. It says where their power, their purpose is to give, they're going to hate the whore and they're going to destroy her. So they have a purpose. And God actually says later, I think it's in chapter 18 where we get there, he says that their purpose is to destroy the whore. And God is going to put in their heart to fulfill his will to put the judgment and destroy the whore that we're talking about. But they're going to have one mind, and they're going to give their power and strength unto the beast. And then 14, they shall make war with the Lamb. The Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So here we have, and I think this is what we're going to call Armageddon. We talked a little bit about Armageddon before, and we're going to look at it a little bit later. But there's coming a time when all of the armies of the world are going to gather together into a valley outside of Jerusalem. I don't know how far it is from Jerusalem. I don't think it's right outside it. But there's going to be a place in Israel where they're going to gather together. They're going to have a great big battle. It's called the Battle of Armageddon. It's so much a part of our culture and part of our English language that we even have movies that talk about it. I think we had a movie here a few years ago called talking about Armageddon. And we hear about it in different people's talking. You read a book and you talk about people, it's going to be like the Battle of Armageddon, or it's going to be like Armageddon. Great big battles. And I know different people at different times, even during World War II, was thinking, okay, here's Armageddon, it's coming, it's here, it's at the doors. So it's a great big war, and I think that's what this is talking about. God's going to gather all these kingdoms. We've talked about this before in some of the other studies. We're going to talk about it again. He talks about bringing them all together, and he's going to bring them all into one place, and he's going to destroy you. I don't think that means that every man, woman, child on earth is going to be destroyed at that time. But the armies that come up, the people, the soldiers that come up to go to fight, are going to be destroyed in this Battle of Armageddon. So that's where that comes in. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they are called and chosen and faithful. You want to be with that group because they're going to win the battle. You don't want to be with the other group because they're going to lose. And then in verse 15, says, the waters which thou sawest where the horse sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. We talked about that a little bit. The 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, this is what I was talking about, shall hate the whore, shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. Then in verse 18 it says, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. I'm going to take a break right there, and I'm going to go back and take a look at something very quickly. Hopefully we make it city, because we talked earlier about the 7 heads being 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And it says the woman is that great city which sits on 7 hills, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Who is that? We identified one of them as Rome. It's the most famous one that's been identified. Let's take a look at some things. Go back to Daniel chapter 2. There are several prophecies in Daniel which are very important here in understanding what we're going to talk about. Daniel chapter 2. I don't know how last time you read Daniel, how much you know about Daniel. Very interesting. One of my favorite books. I like to read it. I understand the first 6 chapters fairly well. It's the last 6 chapters I have a hard time with. Daniel chapter 2, and I'm going to start reading in verse 37. Verse 36. It says, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. Remember, he had seen a dream. The king had seen a dream with this image of a head of gold, the shoulders and the torso of silver, the groin area, the legs, top of the legs and the stomach were made out of brass, and then the bottom was made out of the legs, and the toes were made out of iron, and the toes were mixed iron with miry clay. So Nebuchadnezzar is identified here as the head of gold. It said, after these shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another 3rd kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much iron breaketh in pieces and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of the potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And I'm going to stop right there. The point I want to make is this. There are 4 kingdoms. And we see this 3 different times in Daniel. 4 kingdoms. Okay? We know that the first one is Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon. We can identify from the history and from what he says, and also in chapter 7, if you take a look at it. I'm not going to try and read it all because we will run out of time. But what happens is we have the first kingdom of Babylon. The kingdom that comes after him, the kingdom that conquers Babylon, is of the Medes and the Persians. You've got Darius, and you've got Cyrus, and you've got some others, the Medes and the Persians, and we've heard of the Persian Empire. It actually fell in our lifetime, about 20 years ago. So when the Shah of Iran fell, that was the kingdom of Persia. So it's a well-known kingdom, been out there for years and years and years, and Darius was the one who conquered. If you look at it, I think it's in chapter 6, Daniel was actually called because the writing of the hand, the fingers of a hand appeared and were wrote on the wall because the king was abusing the pieces that Nebuchadnezzar captured from the temple. They were using them in their evil party. So it says there are 4 kingdoms. There's the kingdom of Babylon. There's the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, which comes after the kingdom of Babylon. And who conquers the Medes and the Persians? It's Greece. Remember Alexander the Great? And they've got a new movie out, about Alexander. He comes out every so often. We've heard him all the way through history, Alexander the Great. lived a very short time, died of some sort of fever. They had controversy over how he died. Different people have different ideas. But he died at about 33 years old. He conquered all the known world. There was, different stories about him. But he dies. He goes out of Greece. He conquers the Medes and the Persians. He goes all the way down to India, conquers down to India, conquers all the way down into Egypt. As far as the known world that he knew of at that time, he was the conqueror. He was the one that was leading it. That's the third kingdom. It says in his, it was divided, and you start reading the stories about it. He died, and his 4 generals took over, so we've got 4 horns that come up in one story, and I think you've got different ones that go, and they go to different parts of the world, and they become kings in their own right. I think one general took over Egypt and the areas around Egypt, the southwest, if you will. One general went back to Greece and took over Greece and Rome and all of those areas over there. You had another one that went to the northeast and another one to the southeast, to India. And so they had these different kingdoms, and the ones that prevailed actually were the ones in Egypt and the ones in Rome. And after a time, the one in Rome became the dominant. And then so the last kingdom that comes up is the kingdom of Rome, because that's the one that had the last great kingdom. So there's 4 kingdoms, and I wanted to make that point. It says in the 4th kingdom, then if you look at it, the very end of it, let's see where it was. It says in verse 43, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves, but they shall not cleave one another, even as iron. And the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces, and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, that great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation of thereof sure. So the prophecy is to King Nebuchadnezzar in this prophecy, and in Daniel, and you can see it repeated 2 other times, Daniel chapter 7 and chapter 8, and I think chapter 9 and 11 and 12, it gets really, really fun, trying to understand some of the other ones. But it's very clear, Babylon, Persians, you have Greece, you have Rome. Those are the 4 kingdoms. What is the kingdom that comes after them? It's the kingdom made by God, that stone cut out without hands. It destroys, it hits the image at the feet. It destroys the 4th kingdom and takes over and sets up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. That's what it says here. You can see the same thing in Daniel chapter 7. Go through it just very, I think it's chapter 7 and verse 19. Look at the first part of it, you can see where it's talking about the different beasts and the kingdoms. I think it's 16. Verse 16, Daniel comes to one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, made me know the interpretation of things. These great beasts, which are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. And so it goes through and it talks about them. Where here again we have the prophecy. There are 4 kingdoms. The last kingdom is Rome. That's the kingdom that was over John, when it was over all of the world when John wrote the book of Revelation. It's the kingdom that is the last kingdom before Jesus Christ sets up his final kingdom, the kingdom that shall have no end, the one that's prophesied here. So when we come back and we look at this, we're trying to figure out which one are we talking about, the city, the dominion that reigns over the world, over the peoples of the earth. We're talking about Rome. How is Rome still dominant? It's more dominant in its religious aspects, it's more famous in its religious aspects, and its control of the world by its religion. So, controversial as that seems, controversial as it comes across, I think actually what it's talking about here is Roman Catholicism and all of its offshoots and all of its outpourings. You think about the Reformation, what were they doing? They were trying to break away from a church that had gone so corrupt, so vile, that they were selling indulgences. You could do anything you wanted to. They were having orgies in the Vatican. They were having orgies in the papal offices. They were doing whatever they wanted to do. You could buy the papacy, but the Pope or whatever, the throne of the Pope. You could buy a bishop, or could buy a diocese. You could buy control of it through all the corruption and all the different things that went on, all sorts of licentiousness and sorts of going different on indulgences that they were selling. And when the Great Reformation started in the 1300s, they were fighting against these things that the church had taken up. They were claiming to be Christian. They were claiming the name of Christ. They were taking all these things and calling them Christian and telling all these people they should do certain things, they should live a certain way, they should have a certain morality, but they didn't live that way, and you could buy, and it was corrupt. They were selling themselves for advantage, and they were selling their religion and their righteousness, if you will. They were pacifying the people. That is spiritual fornication. That is spiritual adultery. That's what it's talking about when it's talking about this whore. That's what I see. And I think, to me, that's fairly clear in the scriptures. So, that's chapter 17. And I'm already almost out of time, so I'm going to stop there. And we can come back to this and finish the other parts of it, because we still got to go another chapter and 4 verses, chapter 18 through the 4th verse in chapter 19. And anybody have a question? I've gone through this fairly quickly. It's maybe a little bit confusing. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, but